The day my dear wife passed away, I truly believed in my soul that losing her was the very hardest thing I would ever have to face in this life. I thought my heart had broken as much as it possibly could, leaving nothing but a heavy sadness where our love used to be. But I was quite wrong about that. Just 9 short, blurry days after we said our final goodbyes and watched her casket disappear, I found myself standing in front of a very large door to a beautiful, luxury penthouse apartment. I never even knew this place existed in our city. Standing there in that quiet, fancy hallway, I realized something that shook me to my core. After being happily married for 29 wonderful years, I hadn't actually known the full, real story of the woman I loved so much. My name is Kevin James. For a long time, my life has been centered around being a high school history teacher here in Denver, Colorado. I love my job because it helps me show young people how the past makes us who we are today. My wife, Sandra, and I first crossed paths back in 1995. We were at a small get-together for the teachers at our school. I remember the room was warm and filled with the smell of coffee and old books. She was having a very spirited and loud argument with Professor Philosophy. They were debating about how people pass down their money and their special belongings to their families. I decided to walk over and jokingly asked her which side of the argument I should take to help her win. She laughed at my silly interruption, and that simple, slightly strained conversation was the beginning of a beautiful journey we took together. Our marriage lasted for 29 years, filled with birthdays, holidays, and regular Tuesday nights. In many ways, Sandra and I were like night and day, or like 2 different colors that somehow look good when you put them next to each other. I am someone who loves a steady, quiet routine. I like knowing what is going to happen next and having a very stable, predictable life. Sandra, however, was different. She was very ambitious. She liked to keep her work life very private, and she was always busy working on big projects that I only partly understood. For many years, her job required her to travel quite a bit for what she called consulting work. She told me that some of what she did was top secret or confidential, meaning she couldn't share the details with me. However, she always promised me that our family was safe and that we were doing okay with our money. She also promised me that everything she was doing was completely legal and followed every single law. Once, when the house was quiet, I asked her if she was ever in any real danger because of her work. She looked me right in the eyes, her gaze steady and kind, and said no. I believed her because when you have been with someone for 15 years, trusting them feels much more natural and right than being suspicious or worried. Then, on a Tuesday, September 16th, the life I knew just vanished like smoke. I was at South High School getting a history lesson ready for my students. I was thinking about the pioneers and the mountains. Suddenly, the phone in my classroom started ringing. A police officer from Denver was on the other end of the line. His voice was very serious and gentle. He told me that Sandra had been killed in a car accident on the Big I-25 highway. Her silver Lexus had been hit near University Boulevard. Even though the medical teams and the ambulances arrived very fast, it was just too late. Sandra was already gone. I remember sitting perfectly still at my wooden desk. I was staring at all the school papers scattered all over the floor, and I could hear my students walking and laughing in the hallway outside. To them, it was just a normal Tuesday afternoon. Everything looked so ordinary, and that was the thing that really hurt the most. My entire world had just collapsed and ended, but everyone else was still just going to class and moving on with their day as if nothing had changed. Our 2 children, Amber and Drew, came home right away. We held each other and cried until we had no tears left. We buried Sandra that Saturday, under a big blue Colorado sky. I stood up in front of all the people who loved her, and I spoke about the woman I had known for nearly 30 years. I really thought that saying goodbye at the funeral would be the hardest part of this whole experience. But then Monday morning arrived, bringing a new mystery. A man named Victor Polson came to my house. He told me he was a notary, which is someone who helps make sure important papers are signed correctly, and he helped handle people's estates. We sat down at my kitchen table, and he placed 2 things in front of me, a small black key card and a legal document called a deed. He told me that Sandra had left me a penthouse. I just sat there and stared at him, my mouth probably hanging open. I had never heard a single word about any penthouse. This home was in the Inspire Tower, which is one of the most expensive and fancy high-rise buildings in all of downtown Denver. It was worth more than $2 million. I learned that Sandra had bought it 8 years ago using a special type of company called an LLC to keep it private, so no one would know she owned it. Then, about 14 months before she died, she had officially changed the papers to make me the owner. I asked Victor why she never mentioned it to me. He told me he wasn't allowed to talk about her private choices. That evening, I called my best friend, Frank, and told him everything. He listened for a long time and then said something I couldn't stop thinking about. He said that if Sandra went through all that hard work to leave me that place, she probably wanted me to find something inside of it that would help me understand. The very next morning, I met with my lawyer, Ruth Calloway. She looked into everything and told me it was all perfectly legal and right. The apartment was fully paid for and was now worth about $2.2 million. But Ruth found something else in the paperwork. There was another name linked to Sandra's business, a woman named Carla Brine. I didn't know who she was either. I drove over to the tower, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and took the elevator all the way up to the 42nd floor. There were only 2 big apartments up there. I stood outside Unit PH2, holding the black key card my wife had left for me. I took a deep breath, smelled the cool air, and opened the door. The apartment was huge and very bright. It had giant windows that went from the floor all the way up to the ceiling, showing a perfect, clear view of the Rocky Mountains. Everything inside looked very fancy and expensive, but felt very quiet and lonely. Then I noticed someone sitting on the sofa. A woman with short hair the color of silver stood up. She looked at me with a kind smile and introduced herself. She said, "My name is Carla Brine. I worked with Sandra for a long time." I asked her what my wife's job really was. Carla explained that for the last 11 years, Sandra had been a specialist who helped big companies. When major businesses were having huge fights in their boardrooms, or when 2 companies were becoming one, or when there was a big crisis, they would hire Sandra to help them fix it. She was like a person who fixes broken puzzles that no one else can solve. She was incredibly good at her job and very successful. Carla showed me the bank records and the money involved. It was so much that I could hardly believe it. My wife had quietly built up a whole fortune on her own, without me ever knowing. Carla told me that Sandra was always so proud of me. She said Sandra called me the most honest and steady person she knew, because I provided a stable and happy home. Sandra felt she had the freedom to build her own professional world out there. Then, Carla gave me a folder. Sandra had put together over a year before she died. Inside was a handwritten letter. In the letter, Sandra said she was sorry for keeping so many things a secret from me. She explained that some secrets had to be kept because of the type of work she did for those companies. But she also admitted that some of the secrets were just for herself. She said she loved being my wife and loved being a mother to our kids more than anything else. However, she also needed to have a part of her life that was just hers, where she could know who she was as a person outside of being a mom or a wife. She wrote a sentence that I will keep in my heart forever. She said, "None of this was about trying to get away from you. I chose you every single day." She then told me to look at page 4 of the folder. That page was a warning. Sandra wrote about a man named Gordon Hale. He had given her some money to start her business a long time ago. He was supposed to get a small part of what she earned, but Sandra had legally ended that deal and paid him every cent he was owed. She knew that once she was gone, Gordon might try to come after me. She warned me that he might try to say he owned the penthouse or her other money. She told me very clearly, "Do not argue with him. Do not sign any papers he gives you. And do not try to explain yourself." She gave me the name of a specific lawyer who had all the proof that Gordon had no right to anything. That very afternoon, Gordon called me. His voice sounded very smooth and kind, like he was my best friend. He told me how sorry he was about Sandra, and then said there were some old business things they hadn't finished yet. I just listened to him and stayed calm. When he was done talking, I simply gave him the phone number for the special lawyer Sandra had mentioned. I told him that the lawyer had every single paper, including the one Gordon had signed himself saying the deal was over. The phone went completely silent. Then I just hung up Sandra had known exactly what he would do. She had gotten everything ready to protect me. A few days later, I sat down with Amber and Drew and told them the whole story. They were so surprised to hear about their mom's secret career and the money she had made. But Amber said something that helped me see things clearly. She said, "Dad, Mom knew you would need something real that you could touch to believe all of this was true." She was right. Having the penthouse made the story real. Eventually, I went back to teaching history at South High. My classroom looked exactly the same. The students were the same, and the view of the parking lot from my window hadn't changed at all. But I was a different person. I finally understood that Sandra didn't keep her secret life because she didn't love us. She just built a little piece of the world that was hers alone. I feel honored that after 29 years, she trusted me enough to know I would understand why she did it. I decided I won't sell the penthouse. Sometimes our children come to visit me there, and we look at the lights. Sometimes I go there just to be by myself. Whenever I stand by those big windows and look out at the mountains, I can almost see Sandra standing there next to me. I imagine her planning her next big project while we watch the sun go down together. For nearly 30 years, I thought I knew every single thing about my wife. After she was gone, I found out I only knew the part she decided to show me. At first, that thought made me sad. But now I feel thankful. Sandra didn't just leave me a building or money. She left me one last beautiful lesson about life. She taught me that loving someone doesn't mean you have to know every single secret they have in their head. Sometimes, love is about trusting that the person standing next to you is still the person you chose to love, even when you find out there were parts of them you never knew about. Sandra used to tell me that October was her favorite time of year in Denver because it felt honest. The air gets chilly, the leaves turn bright colors, and nothing tries to be something it isn't. I think about that every time I look out those windows at the mountains. I whisper the words I wish I could say to her now. You were always better at the small details than I was, Sandra. And even after 29 years, you still found a way to surprise me. Thank you for choosing me.